When Noah was acquainted with the irreverent action of Ham. Curse of Ham. When Noah was acquainted with the irreverent action of Ham, he cursed him in a branch of his posterity. Cursed, said he, be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. Genesis 9, verse 25. This curse, if it be a curse, being pronounced not against Ham, the immediate transgressor, but against his son, who does not appear from the words of Moses to have been in any way concerned in the crime. Though the Jews believe it was Canaan who first discovered his father's nakedness, and went and told his father, who made sport of the accident, has occasioned several conjectures. Some have believed that Noah cursed Canaan because he could not have well cursed Ham himself, whom God no long before had blessed. Other authorities claim that this curse was merely a prophecy that the sons of Japheth and Shem should have dominion over the sons of Ham. A learned author has affirmed, see Mead's works, that there has never yet been a son of Ham who has shaken a scepter over the head of Japheth. Shem has subdued Japheth, and Japheth has subdued Shem, but Ham never subdued either. However, this must be a mistake. If there be any truth in what the Egyptian histories relate of the actions of Sesostris and some others of their kings who have conquered the greatest part of Asia and Europe, and consequently may be said to have subdued both. Besides, we find the Israelites were long the slaves of Mizraim, or the Egyptians, and we see no reason why the shameful submission which Rehoboam, the son and successor of Solomon, made to Shishak, the Egyptian pharaoh, who, after taking all the strong cities of Judah, seems to have had Jerusalem delivered up to him without opposition to be spoiled with the temple, may not be deemed a servitude, it being expressly said that the Jews should be his servants. Ham also appears to have encroached upon Shem very early, for he seems to have driven the Shemites out of their first seats in Shinar. And everybody knows the Babylonians, who were Hamites, had a considerable share in the destruction of the Assyrian Empire. But a stronger instance than any of the preceding is the Babylonish captivity in which the Jews themselves were the sufferers. Indeed, the very branch of Canaan seems to have had great success against Japheth, not only by the exploits of the Carthaginians, originally Canaanites, in Italy, but by their conquest in Spain, where Ham went after the deluge. Ham probably removed from Shinar, supposing him to be the Cronus of Sancha Neatho. He reigned in Phoenicia. According to others who make him to be the same with Menes, he must have settled in Egypt, which indeed in Scripture is often called the land of Ham. Cush, his eldest son, according to Josephus and the ancients, was the father of the Ethiopians who, he says, were in his time called Cushians, not only by themselves, but all Asia over. But it is not likely that if Mizraim and Canaan settled themselves in the land between him and Shinar, that his son Nimrod would be found erecting a monarchy so early in that country. It is more probable that he seated himself in the southeastern part of Babylonia, and in the adjoining part of Sasunia, still called Kazakhstan, or the country of Chuz, from whence his posterity in the succeeding generations might have passed into other countries. That part of Arabia near the Red Sea was named Cush, appears from Scripture. Cushan and Midian are joined together as one or neighboring people dwelling in tents, and in another place the Arabs are made to border on the Cushites, which, therefore, cannot be the Ethiopians, to which may be added other scriptural proofs. In a word, by Cushan scriptures is always to be understood Arabia. As for those texts which are alleged to prove Cush is sometimes taken to mean Ethiopia, they may also be expounded of Arabia. Cush, according to the Arab and Persian traditions, which name him Cuth, was king of the territory of Babel, and resided in Erech, where there were 2 cities of his name, whence was king of the territory of Babel, and resided in Erech, where there were 2 cities of his name, whence, among other reasons, Dr. Hyde is of the opinion that Cush reigned in Babylonia, and that his descendants removed into Arabia. This has given occasion to those who suppose Cush to be Ethiopian to spread them all along the coast of Africa to the end of Mauritania. Those who place them in Arabia are divided about their situation. To follow, therefore, the rules we have laid down, we will suppose, first, that Seba situated himself somewhere in the south of Chaldea or the Arabia Erech, because, second, his second brother Havilah's country lay thereabouts, watered by the Pison. Third, Sapta's seat perhaps lay more to the south, where we find a city called Saptha by Ptolemy, not far from the Persian Gulf, and another named Sabbatha, lower down in Arabia Felix, which comes much nearer Sapta. Rama or Regma may find a place more southward still, about a city called Regma by Ptolemy in the same Gulf. Some moderns mention a city not far from it called Badin, which Dr. Wells does not doubt was the residence of his son Dedan, though others will have Rama and both his sons Sheba as well as Dedan to people the parts adjacent to the Red Sea. They conclude Dedan to have been near Edom because Ezekiel joins them together, as Rama must have been near Sheba, being mentioned as joint traders to Tyre and spices by the same prophet, Ezekiel chapter 27, verse 22. And elsewhere Sheba or Seba are joined as neighbors through distinguished as different kingdoms. They seem to have possessed a larger part of Arabia, for Pliny observes that the Sabian nations inhabited from sea to sea, i.e. from the Arabian to the Persian Gulf. A late writer supposes Sheba lived on the borders of the land of Midian, and gave name to the country whose queen, in after ages, went to visit Solomon. But the Arabs say the country of Sheba lies in a great way more to the south in Yemen, or, as we call it, Arabia Felix, near the Indian Sea, the chief city of which was formerly Seba, now called Nerid. And it must be confessed this seems to be the country of Sheba mentioned in Scripture, for frankincense grows thereabouts. Fifth, Saptica was puzzled all the geographers to assign his quarters. Bocart, not finding a place in Arabia which bore any resemblance to the name, passes over to Carmania in Persia and presses the city Sammides into the service, observing that M and B are often changed, the one for the other, by the Arabs and their neighbors. On the other hand, Dr. Wells imagines that the Saracens are the descendants of Saptica, which nation being styled at first by the Greek Saptacina. That name was afterwards softened into Saracina, and the rather, he thinks, because alluding to the Arabic verb saraka, to steal, it served for a nickname, though indeed the word Saraceni is no other than shark, in which in Arabic signifies Easterlings, as the African Arabs west of Egypt are called Moghrabins or Westerlings. Sixth, Nimrod is agreed to have kept possession of Shinar and erected a kingdom there, making Babel the seat of his empire. Mizraim stands in the place of the second son of Ham, for there is a great dispute whether this is the name of a single person or a person as having a dual termination, though the verb in the text where he is said to beget Ludin is in the singular number, which favors the former opinion. It is plain that the names of Ludin and all the rest of his descendants are plural. As to the nations descended from Mizraim, first, the Ludim are judged to be the people above Egypt called by the Greek Ethiopians, and at present Abyssins. Bocart endeavors to prove it by no less than 10 arguments. We rarely hear them called otherwise in Scripture than Lud, either from the name of their founder or their country. In one passage of Scripture, Lud are called a mixed people. In others, they are said to be very skillful in drawing the bow, which the Ethiopians are famous for. And in 2 of the above-mentioned passages, Lud is joined with Cush and Phut, as are the Ludins elsewhere with the Egyptians, from which it may be inferred they were all neighboring people. The Anamim are thought by Bocart to be the Ammonians, of inhabitants of that part of Libya where stood the temple of Jupiter Ammon, descended, according to Herodotus, partly from the Egyptians and partly from the Ethiopians. The Leabim are supposed to be the same with the Ludim, who, with the Sukims and Cushites, came out of Mizraim, or Egypt, with Shishak to invade Judea. These, therefore, may not improbably be judged to be the Libyans of Cyrenaica, or proper Libya in Egypt. And thus the author might speak of the settlements affected by the Naphthuim, Pathrasim, Cashlahim, Philistim, whom we know to have first settled Egypt before going into Canaan, Caphtorim, etc. Authors are not agreed about the country where Phut, the third son of Ham, settled himself. Bocart says that Mizraim and Phut divided Africa between them. We find Cush, Lud, and Phut among the nations who, according to Jeremiah's prophecy, were to overrun Egypt, as Nebuchadnezzar's afterwards did, which looks as if Phut's quarters lay somewhere between Cush and Babylon. The posterity of Canaan, viz. Sidon, Heth, the Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Archites, Semeites, Aravites, Zermarites, and Hamathites undoubtedly settled in Phoenicia. This last statement should be well borne in mind in considering the table given at the first of this book. Beginning of mankind. It is impossible to know the source of the human race, since the spot of creation in the Garden of Eden is shrouded in mystery and doubt. If we accept the scholarly view of the greatest historians of Europe who study this matter under the tutelage of the great Duke of Marlborough in the 15th century, we find the most probable locations of the Garden of Eden at the junction of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. If we knew positively of what terrestrial section Adam was an inhabitant, it would be easier to ascertain the original physical attributes and relationships of the human race, and hence whether he were a Negro or a man of white skin. We do know that the description of his clothing indicates that Adam lived in a tropical country, and to believe that all the insects, animals, and creatures of animal life in existence today were represented either in Eden or preserved of their kind in the ark is preposterous. They have, many of them, been evolved by the processes of intergeneration and crossing, just as we today are able to create new kinds of flowers, plants, and the like. See the references to the first cooked book elsewhere in this work. This would indicate that mankind originally dwelt in the tropics where fruits were plentiful and no requirements of warmth to the body were essential. But we are more concerned about the positive creation of the different races after the deluge, if we are to accept the Mosaic account as correct. This seems to us the most plausible, aside from any claims to its inspiration. The author has seen fit elsewhere to introduce a very extended account of the deluge in order to set forth what he believes to be the most natural evidences of all that is claimed in the Mosaic accounts. We are positively assured from the account of the deluge that the human race has its second beginning in the survival of Noah and his 3 sons. It would require volumes upon volumes to enter upon any scientific dissertation upon the various interchanges to which mankind may have been subjected until we have reached our present remarkable condition of humanity, in which we find, from the same original head, the sole man Noah, so many differing species of man. While we may offer scholarly excuses for pigmentations that make one man black and another brown, and still another yellow and yet another white, we are at loss to account for any extraneous influences which could perpetrate or affect such directly racial peculiarities as are visible in the almond eyes of the Chinese, the curly hair of the Negro, the straight hair of the Chinaman, both of whom have undergone very nearly similar atmospheric and physical exposures. Besides, it must be plainly denied and repudiated as demonstrated fact to the contrary, that climate is entirely responsible for the fact of the Negro's darkness or the Caucasian's blondness. It has been clearly shown that the Negro who has not intermarried has retained his intense darkness even in the temperature zones, and the best refutation of this old-time theory is found in the Eskimo, who, although for at least 500 years resident in the Arctic region, and that where the sun only shines 6 months during a full year, still remains black. Since we cannot lay it to climactic or local conditions, we are then forced to reach our conclusions through an impartial study of the physical similarities of race. For, should we permit ourselves to be guided to our conclusions by other judgments, we will be met with contradictions in physical life in these localities, which will lead us entirely into the dark. A study of the monuments and other delineations of ancient personages clearly demonstrates that the thick lip, peculiar bone formations, and general similarities found in nationalities, but peculiar to certain races alone, are not matters of locality, but of racial relationship. An instance of this is peculiarly demonstrated in the descendants of certain Mongolian missionaries who, according to the imperial records of China, were sent to what is now known to the American continent and perfected settlements long before our permanent establishment of sovereignty in the United States. Many centuries after these religious invasions, we are told that tribes have been found in Alaska, where these missionaries made their first pilgrimages, possessing the peculiar characteristics of the Mongolians to a marked degree. Yet location has, in this instance, been entirely distinct and unsimilar. Let us take the case of Cleopatra, accredited by history as the most gorgeous and lovely of womanhood. Dark, of Greco-Egyptian blood, she was assuredly Negro, for we find she possessed the thick, sensual lips, the other unfailing hand marks of the African, while her features indicate an infusion of Jewish blood, and her conduct in her political life showed an unusual affinity with the Hebrews. We will have occasion to speak of Cleopatra at greater length further on in this work. From pictures made 3,000 years ago in Egypt, the differences of racial characteristics were very clearly depicted in the hair, the features of the face, and indeed the color of the skin. When considered by this ethnological standard, we note the fact that the Anglo-American, Caucasian, with his brown hair, his fair face, high, prominent, and broad forehead, his great brain capacity, his long head, and his delicately molded features, bears such a marked contrast to the Chinaman, with his yellow skin, flat nose, black, coarse hair, almond-shaped eyes, and round skull, and we are brought face to face with the fact that the best authorities believed that it has required thousands of years to evolve these racial differences from one original species. The Egyptians held at the time of Herodotus, about 450 BC, that man had been in existence 25,000 years. We are forced to recognize the still remaining strikingly similar racial characteristics of the Jewish and Negro types in their eyes, hair, forehead, thick, sensual lips, and the peculiar formations of their fingernails, and we wonder at the little differences wrought in all those long periods, notwithstanding the migrations of the Hebrew race. Studies of Jew and Negro portraits tell their own story best. They have been selected from Negroes and Jews of the highest order, and without regard to location of the subject selected. The author regards the best specimens of Negro and Jew types from European and African countries, but being unwilling to compare any other than portraits of those whom he has been permitted to personally interview for the purpose of reassuring himself as to nationalities, he is forced to content himself with pictures of only American subjects. It is not amiss just here to introduce a feature in the earliest attempts at Central American civilization, which, the author believes, has its bearing on this subject. Our ethnologists have remarked the striking similarity between the resemblance of Toltec and Egyptian civilization. In art, architecture, and industry, in worship, and the elements of knowledge, they are a resemblance to Egyptian models. Let us add to this the still more remarkable claim of some reputable ethnologists that the Eskimo tribes found in North America have many traits in their language, habits, and physical features resembling the Hebrews, and couple to this statement the claims of other historians and ethnologists that they were probably a remnant of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Noting the apparent similarity of these Egyptian inhabitants of Central America, the Toltecs, with their already recognized racial intermixture with the Hebrews, considering the resemblance of the Esquimaux mentioned above. When we note the unquestionable Negro features of the Esquimaux, we at once have a further proof of the contention claimed by this book. The argument set forth by Hebrew writers that their race has been kept aloof from intermarriages by divine interference falls flat in the face of uncontrovertible historical proofs, and the well-known Jewish proclivity to override even the directly delivered admonitions of God, as did the Jews on so many occasions expressly chronicled in their history. It is not reasonable that a race so callous to direct divine guardianship in matters affecting their personal welfare would preserve and violate an order to abstain from the exercises of a passion so characteristic of the Hebrew blood as that of cohabitation. Besides, we need no conjecture on this point. Their history is conclusive to the contrary. Language, a test of relationship. Many anthropologists base their deductions on racial affinities on the similarity or dissimilarity of languages or dialects employed by these races. The sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth all took part in the building of the Tower of Babel, and if we may judge by the fact that in the confusion of tongues administered as a rebuke to the builders, it is noticeable that the Canaanites, descendants of Ham, and the Hebrews afterwards retained the same language. If Leo and the African historians are to be credited, Sabtika, the son of Cush, first peopled the Sahara between the mountains of Atlas and Nagritia, and therefore probably Nagritia itself. From the same author it appears that the various Nigridian dialects bear an affinity to the Chaldee, Arabic, and Egyptian tongues, to which we may add, and consequently to the Ethiopic, which does not differ widely from them. One historian of note says, in speaking of the Nigritia and their affiliations with the Carthaginians and Egyptians, one part of the army of the Carthaginians consisted of Nigritian troops. They used scythed chariots in their wars and were armed after the manner of the western Ethiopians, with bows and arrows of the same make. This same author then plunges into an extensive anthropological account and concludes with the statement, "This evinces that the Negroes, or blacks, held an early correspondence with the ancient Mauritanians, Numidians, and Carthaginians, taking a part of Africa as an object for consideration. In a country of so vast an extent as Ethiopia, inhabited by various nations, it is natural to suppose that no small variety of languages, at least of dialects, must have prevailed. The most ancient of these was undoubtedly that called the Ethiopic, into which the Holy Scripture was formerly translated, and in which all the books of the Abyssinians, both sacred and profane, are written. Some authors have informed us that this language nearly resembles the Chaldee, but according to Ladolphus, who spent over 60 years in the study of it, it bears as great an affinity to the Hebrew and Syriac and approaches nearer still to the Arabic, from which, to him, it seems immediately to be derived. In short, there is so perfect an agreement between them that whoever understands the one may, without any difficulty, make himself master of the others. He even goes so far as to assert that a competent knowledge of the Hebrew will enable a student soon to make a very laudable progress in the Ethiopic. To support this view, we know that the Ethiopians received an accession of almost 500,000 Egyptians under the reign of Psammiticus, according to Herodotus. Many of these had acted in military capacity in different parts of Ethiopia for 3 years, when they had deserted to the king of Ethiopia and became citizens of his country. They were given lands by the king and became a part of his government and people. Africanus, the historian, declares the Ethiopians were masters in Egypt 80 years before the time of Psammiticus. Herodotus shows that the origin of the alphabet was Phoenician, Semitic, as does Pliny, and taken directly from the Egyptian forms, as Eusebius and the classic authorities from Plato to Tacitus agree. The Phoenicians, Jews, were great travelers, aptly called colossal peddlers of the Old World by Dr. Huxley. Thus, we have a connecting link here, further proving their early relationship. Accepting the table given elsewhere in this work as a correct division of the races, we find the Old Testament filled with Egyptian words in the Semitic form, and we know that the Jews grew from a race of only 17 souls to over millions of people in Egypt. It is seen that the Phoenicians, as well as the Assyrians, were in part members of the Hebrew Semitic family. It is elsewhere shown that the Phoenicians were pioneer settlers among almost all the other races and intermarried indiscriminately with them. Their blending with the Egyptian, Hamitic, people is a part of history's record. The Hebrew alphabet was, of itself, of Egyptian origin. Their language, customs, and education were of Egyptian origin, and it is a surprising fact that many of the identical symbols of Egyptian ideograms were found even among the earlier races of the Mexicans. Pro-Egyptian Jewish tendency.